I am very excited to talk about a topic that I have a lot of conviction on, and that's marriage. I've had the privilege of being married to this wonderful, godly woman for the past 42 years. We have 7 children. I was able to marry 6 of the 7, and within 3 to 4 weeks, our 7th grandchild is going to be delivered. So we're more than blessed. And when it comes to the topic of marriage, if you've ever been asked a question before, like how do you feel about this topic, and maybe it's a topic you've not had really any experience in, maybe no interest in, no feelings about, and you don't really even know how to react to that question, I don't think how you feel about marriage is one of those. Because every one of you have been affected by marriage, either good or bad. You grew up in a family where your mom and dad either were great examples in their marriage or they were horrible examples, or maybe somewhere in between. Now, if you were raised in a family where your mom and dad had a terrible marriage, it's really challenging for a young child to process that, just emotionally. It's very damaging. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of pain. And the child that's raised in a godly Christian home, what a blessing. I think as a married couple, one of the greatest blessings you can ever give your kids is a great marriage. Because you instill in them a stability, a peace, a comfort. And to me, a really strange phenomenon that I've noticed is I know people who were raised in a family where mom and dad were in conflict, had a terrible relationship, and they actually went on and got married and had a fantastic marriage. And I know other people who were raised in a godly Christian family with parents that had a great marriage. They went on to get married and had a terrible marriage. And you ask the question, how is that even possible? Well, obviously, the one in the good marriage never really imitated what they grew up seeing. But you have to ask the question, how in the world did that one person pull it off, raised in that horrible environment? And I'll tell you how it happened. Because my wife grew up in a family with a lot of conflict. And when she was watching mom and dad fight, feeling the deep pain in that, she made a decision as a young child, when I get married, I'm never going to put my kids in a position of watching me fight with my husband where they're going to go through what I've gone through. And the thing about marriage when you have kids is sometimes, in fact, quite often, your kids are around you, and then something happens with your spouse that can very easily lead to conflict. And if you're not careful, you can have a fight right there in front of the kids. And my wife has been a great example of the times where things were starting to get a little in need of conversation. She would just take us aside, honey, let's not have this conversation now, or let's have it behind closed doors. So our kids grew up thinking that we never had conflict. It's just that we were so good at not doing it in front of them. And the question comes to this: why get married anyhow? Well, if you don't want to get married, you don't really have to get married. There's nowhere in the Bible where you're commanded to, but if you really don't want to get married, my question is why? And I'm sure there's some complicated answers to that, but I'm going to give you what I think is possibly the number one reason for someone not wanting to get married. And I'm going to give this illustration. When I was in a sales job in Miami, I was selling high-end clothing to executives in their office, and this one client I had told him that my wife and I adopted these 4 girls from Colombia, and he said, "Why would you do that?" And it wasn't out of respect and admiration, it was more out of, why would you be so foolish and bring on more responsibility into your life that you don't have to? And I think that's the reason we tend to not want to jump into marriage, is we know it's going to make our life more difficult. We're going to have to be more responsible. And we're I think I just want to keep things the way they are as a single person. Not realizing that taking on responsibility is the number one way that God grows us in our faith. no question, when we adopted the 4 girls, our life became much more challenging, but man, did we grow so much more spiritually. And one of the challenges in marriage, and I'm sure most of you have heard this phrase before, is marriage is not meant to make you happier, but to make you holier. And I was not expecting that to happen in my marriage with me so quickly, because I kind of entered marriage thinking I was a fairly godly, loving, unselfish person. I was the campus minister here at this church, and I was leading the guys, and I was mentoring and pouring into them and just spending so much of my life helping others. And I'm thinking, how hard could marriage be? Look at how good I am at relationships. And it took me about the 3rd day of marriage for this to really hit home. We're on our honeymoon, we're in Jamaica. Her parents paid for this all-inclusive resort. And on the 2nd day, we discovered that they provided free windsurfing lessons. And I grew up with a best friend in high school that had a boat, and we did everything in the water ski, barefoot, everything. And I always wanted to windsurf. And so this was like a golden opportunity. The guy was teaching both of us, and we both picked it up. And I'm like standing on the board, holding the sail, catching wind. I'm watching my newly wedded wife go in that direction. And the way we perceived this was totally different. I'm thinking we are windsurfing together. And she's thinking, we are really totally separate here. And after about an hour, she had enough. And, for a guy who's used to hanging around guys, if my buddy had come with me and we discovered this windsurfing, both of us would be like, man, all day long. We got to block this out. What an opportunity. After about an hour, she had enough. And we're talking about what to do the rest of the day. I'm saying, the rest of the day, let's windsurf. This is awesome. And I said, what else would you want to do? And she says, well, I do want to go and pick out, tablecloths. Yeah, I've always dreamed of that on my honeymoon. And so, as a typical clueless guy would do, I said, honey, let's do this. You go and pick out tablecloths, and I'll spend the day windsurfing. So this is how I came into marriage. Just my ability to be intimate and close and understand that treating a wife is totally different to hanging with the guys. And then we leave Jamaica and we move to London, England, where we're with the church there. And after not very long, I remember her and I going somewhere together, and we jumped on one of their buses, which is such a cool thing because it has no door. You can just jump on, jump off when you want. And so the challenge is it's hard to keep track of where these buses are going. And so one would come and you have to quickly decide, is that going where I want it to go? And then I thought this bus was going to take us to where we needed to go. So I said, okay, honey, come on, let's jump on. We jump on. And as soon as we get on, the bus starts taking off, and I realize we're on the wrong bus. Honey, quick, let's jump off. And it's already going pretty fast. And she's like, are you kidding? I said, come on. So I almost make her jump off, and she ends up like stumbling into a car. She hurts her hip. I think that is the coolest thing in the world. That is awesome. I mean, again, if it's one of my buddies, we would have had a great time, but she felt like hurt and not protected and, all those things. And so marriage, it makes you holy because there's a level of intimacy that you can never develop as a single person. And God wants us to learn how to be intimate. We know, he says to Adam, it's not good to be alone. And this really hit home to me years ago when my mom passed away. And the reason it was so impacting was I grew up with a mom and dad that I didn't even know loved each other. Now, they didn't really hate each other, and they didn't really treat each other badly, but I just didn't see affection, love, and intimacy. So when my mom passed away, I just didn't expect the day after her passing, being in a funeral home with my dad, picking out a coffin for my mom, and my dad just broke down crying uncontrollably. I'd only seen my dad cry one time in his life. And I thought, I didn't even know he loved her. And I thought, that kind of oneness, even on that level, is so intimate that after she passed, He was never the same. He used to be into, he had all these woodworking tools, and he would build furniture for her. And as soon as she passed, it was like he gave me all his tools. He says, I'm done with this. There was no reason. And he just was this lonely, depressed. And he's not a very depressed kind of person. And he even talked about suicide. He was just so without his wife. I'm thinking, wow, if that's how that death affected him, and I'm madly in love with my wife, it would be just devastating for me to go on living without my wife. And that's how God intended marriage to be. Unfortunately, the world looks at marriage in a very different way. There's an analogy I like to use that compares how the world looks at marriage. It's like you have a screened-in porch, and you have all these flies on the inside of the porch on the screen trying to get out. Those are the married people. And then you have flies on the outside of the screen trying to get in. Those are the single people. And nobody's content. Those who are married want to get out. Those who are single want to get in, and it's a mess. Listen to this song that was popular when I was a kid. This woman wrote this song. It's kind of a cynical view of marriage, but it's really a view many people have. My friends from college, they're all married now. They have their houses and their lawns. They have their silent noons, tearful nights, angry dawns. And yet they drink, they laugh, close the wound, hide the scar. You say we can keep our love alive. Babe, all I know is what I see. The couples cling and claw, and they drown in love's debris. You say we'll soar like two birds through the clouds, but soon you'll cage me on your shelf. But you say it's time we move in together. Well, that's the way I've always heard it should be. You want to marry me? Okay, we'll marry. And it's such a cynical, sad view that, okay, everyone I know has a bad marriage. You're claiming ours will be different. I'm not convinced, but I guess we'll get married. Now, the great thing about a Christian is if Jesus is Lord and the person you've married makes Jesus Lord, it's like the perfect recipe for success. Because every marriage that has problems because either one or both of the persons decided to become selfish and no longer be a servant. Now, let me ask you this question, true or false? I need to find my soulmate who can complete me to make a great marriage. Yeah, you know it's false. That's Hollywood's version. You know, you've seen the movie where this girl is looking for the perfect guy and she finally finds him and they get married and they live happily ever after. But this idea that there's only one person that God designed for you to marry and you got to find that person. The problem is once you find that person, so you think, and then you get married, and then you start having conflict, and now you're incredibly unhappy, what do you think your conclusion is going to be? I thought I found my soulmate. I made a big mistake. Let's end this relationship and go off and find my soulmate next time. And it doesn't work that way. And another factor is, and I've seen this happen, where one of the persons gets into a relationship because they expect that person to meet all of their spiritual and emotional needs. And it's really a big mistake. I mean, you don't want to be a needy person getting into a relationship. Let's say you have this brother who's just on a regular basis, he's discouraged, he's depressed, he needs support, and he ends up dating one of the sisters in the church, and here it is, he gets discouraged, and she lifts him up, and he's depressed, and she helps him. And, in a weird kind of way, that might work in a dating relationship, but that's not going to work in a marriage. Because God set marriage up to where the man is the leader and the one to be respected, and the woman is the helper and the support. If she's the one constantly providing the help to him emotionally, how is she going to respect him? It's going to be a disaster. And even with God telling Adam, it's not good for you to be alone, he didn't say, I'm going to provide a mother for you. He says, I'm going to provide a helper for you. And I think about the role that my wife and I have together. We lead a community group, and I feel like she is just the perfect helper in that example. So I'm leading the group. When she comments, they're very well thought out comments. They're very supportive of what I'm saying. When it comes to building unity in the group, she's great at texting and keeping the group together and creating a family atmosphere. And I feel blessed as her helper, but what if she went from helper to hindrance? And she says to me, you know, Steve, I really think I'm a better speaker than you. Let me take over this group. Let me lead it. Why don't you support me? That's not going to work. That's not God's role. And what the Bible does say about marriage, let me read this to you in 2 Corinthians 6. He says, do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness? And what communion has light with darkness? And what accord was Christ with Belial? Or what part has a believer with an unbeliever? And what agreement has the temple of God with idols? It's almost like God was making a point. I'm going to knock it through your thick skull 5 different ways. I want to tell you, if you're a Christian, your priorities are totally different to a non-Christian, period. So this is talking about marriage when it talks about being yoked. Rule number 1, never. If you're only going to marry the people you date, what are you doing considering dating someone who's not walking with the Lord? He says it's not going to work. Your priorities are totally different. You're going to be going in totally different directions. And you ask the question, why would someone even consider that? And I think there's really only one reason. It's called desperation. It's just like with Sarah. God told Sarah and Abraham, I'm going to give you a child, but God decided to wait several years. So every year, Sarah's waiting, and she's trying to be faithful, and she believes God's going to provide, but the years kind of wore her down. She got to a point where it's like, I give up. I'm desperate. If this is going to happen, I've got to take matters into my own hands. And so what does she do? She says one of the weirdest things in the whole Bible. She says to her husband, can you sleep with our maid? And he's like, yeah, really? You okay with that? And he does it. And the whole thing becomes a mess because she couldn't wait on the Lord. And I really feel like when a Christian is looking into the world for a spouse, it's because you've concluded there's nobody in the church that's a possibility. There's no hope. I've got to take matters in my own hands. And I remember as a young Christian, there was a sister in our church. She was at the ripe old age of 26. And she really wanted to get married, and there seemed to be no possibilities in the church. And she went from this solid, strong Christian sister to she was getting discouraged. She was doubting her faith. She was really very concerning where she was at spiritually because she just didn't think it could ever work out. And then lo and behold, God gets this brother from the church in Montana who decides to come to South Florida for a summer internship. They meet each other, go on one date. They're like perfectly matched. Like one of the other challenges, she was a University of Florida on the swim team, and she was, kind of a bigger woman, and all the guys in the church were like small stature, and it was kind of hard to kind of see that working out. And this guy comes into the church. He's bigger than she is. He was a wrestler in school, and they were just so well matched. Within 8 months, she was married. And you think, God can do it so quickly, but you got to have faith that it's God's will. So when it comes to equally yoked, it's not just make sure that person is saved, but I think even just being equally yoked spiritually. And if I ask you, give me your list, I think all of you have one. What are you looking for in a spouse? And you're going to probably have a list that has physical characteristics and then spiritual characteristics. The physical characteristics should be optional and preferable, but not set in stone. The spiritual one should be mandatory. And the number one spiritual quality needs to be godliness. But that's kind of a general word. It's like, how do you really know if that person's godly? It can be challenging because some Christians have mastered the art of looking more godly than they really are. And if you're not careful, you get fooled, you get married, and it's like, this is not what I thought I was getting. And every one of those situations that I've known of people that got stuck in that kind of marriage. I asked them, were there any red flags? Without exception, they say yes. And I said, didn't you see them? And they're like, oh, in some cases, like I did, but I didn't realize how bad they were. Or no, I didn't see them at all. But now I look back and there were red flags. And it's so important to be able to get input from other people. It's also important to have a fairly good assessment of ourselves. I mean, let's say spiritually I'm like at a 4 or a 5 on a scale of 1 to 10, and I'm looking for an 8 or a 9, you're going to be single for a long time. Because the 8 or 9 is not looking for a 4 or 5. But let's say you're a 4 or 5 and you want to become an 8 or 9. How do you do that? Well, you could do it a godly way, or you could do it a really worldly way. Let me share with you a verse that's a godly way. In 1 Peter 3, it's referring to the wives. He says, wives, likewise be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they, without a word, may be won by the conduct of their wives. This is how powerful this is. Let's say you're a non-Christian couple, no interest in the Lord, but one day, for some reason, you guys go to church together, and the wife gets super excited about spiritual things, and she keeps going to the church, and you as the husband have no interest. Then she gets into a study, and she's learning what it means to be a Christian, and she comes home, and she shares all that she's learning with her husband. He's got no interest. Then she gets baptized, she shares her faith, she even helps other people become Christians, and he is not interested. And then one day you do something that gets them really interested in the Lord. You just start becoming a submissive, supportive, respectful wife. And that's how powerful it is, where all of a sudden he says, I would like to go with you to that church. And there are 3 qualities. Oh, actually, let me go back a second here. Let me read the rest of this section. He says, do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on fine apparel. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. What God is saying in these verses for the sisters is, you can wear makeup, but don't overdo it. Definitely make sure your hair is clean and brushed, but don't be obsessed over your hair. Yeah, in your clothing, be more concerned about it being modest than being sexy. And let me say this for the sisters. I think you sisters should be helping the sisters with these decisions, because a lot of times it's hard to make that decision on your own, but we can kind of pick up on that. So let me share this one misunderstanding when he says quiet and gentle spirit. That is totally different to a quiet person. A quiet spirit is simply referring to a humility and a servant's heart. And you could have a woman who's just a very meek and quiet woman, but inside she's rebellious and stubborn and proud. You can equally have a very talkative, outgoing woman who just has this beautiful, gentle spirit of submission and love for the Lord and a servant. So that's what he's talking about. So when it comes to who do I find, where's my list, what's important, I'm going to give you 3. Now, if you can find someone who exhibits the fruit of the Spirit, you've hit a home run. And that's love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, faithfulness, goodness, self-control. If you're that and that person's that, man, you're on your way for a phenomenal marriage. And I'm not going to go over all those, but I do want to hit 3 of them I think are so key. Number 1 is joy, which is kind of a surprising one. Why would joy be part of the package here? Well, my experience is if someone is walking close to the Lord gives them joy as a gift. And if you can find someone who's consistently joyful, that is a really good sign. In fact, have you ever experienced this before where someone comes up to you and they say, are you okay? You don't seem to be yourself. And they're actually right. You're not okay. And you think, how did they know that? Because Jesus says the eye is the lamp of the body. And if you're someone who normally is joyful and they can see it in your eyes, and you've maybe pulled back spiritually, you're not doing as well, they can see in your eyes. It's like, where's that joy? I don't see it anymore. So what a great quality for someone to have a lot of joy. Number 2, self-control. Now, let me speak to the guys for a minute. If you are in a job right now and you have the capability of getting into a better job with better pay, but you decide not to because it requires more of you, more responsibility, that's called lack of self-control. That's called I'm being governed by my flesh and not by the Spirit. And I'll give you another example of self-control. Pornography. If you cannot stop looking at pornography, there's not a sister in this church who should marry you. And I would not say a sister should even date you. I mean, think about it. What do you have to offer? I love you. I want to live with you the rest of my life, and I have a problem looking at pictures of naked women. That's really what you have to offer. So if that's something that you're struggling with, you need to stop it immediately and permanently. If there's any hope for you to being with a woman for the rest of your life. And then let me go a little bit further with this. Let's talk about self-control in these areas. Find someone who's not watching what they shouldn't be watching. They're not listening to what they shouldn't be listening to. They're not eating what they shouldn't be eating, and they're not saying what they shouldn't be saying. I mean, those are all our senses that we can control. But if you're someone who just doesn't have the self-control to do that, then I think you end up not being nearly as attractive to someone who's godly. Here's the focus that we all should have. Therefore, we do not lose heart. Even though outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is being renewed day by day. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us far more exceeding an eternal weight of glory, while we do not look at the things which are seen, but at the things which are unseen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are unseen are eternal. Can we make our list based on the unseen, the inward, the things that will never perish? And here's a mistake I think happens. It's like we see someone that's godly, but they're not tall enough. Or we're attracted to this person who's godly, but they're not the right race or nationality. Or he's godly, but he's got the wrong personality. And I think that's a mistake to kind of lock someone in. I'm looking for this kind of personality with this kind of hair and this kind of beauty and focus on the outward. Let me read you another song that was actually more in my dad's day, but when I was a kid, he'd play it. And, no, not that one. Oh, yes, that one. Hold on for a sec. Here it is. It's called If You Want to Be Happy for the Rest of Your Life. Now, if you were the author of that, how would you finish? How would you write that? If you want to be happy for the rest of your life, never make a pretty woman your wife. So from my personal point of view, get an ugly girl to marry you. And that's his solution. And he goes on to describe all the problems a pretty girl is going to cause in your marriage. And in a very blunt way, in a very in-your-face kind of way, he's saying what this verse is saying. The outward is never going to make a great marriage. It's always going to be the inward. And how many people have made the mistake of falling for the outward? And I remember with our 4 Colombian daughters, who were 2 years in a difference in age. They were always together in like a pact. My wife would call it the Colombian cartel. And it was really funny to watch guys who would take an interest in one of my daughters. And they were so stupid because I would see a guy have possibilities at the beginning and then he would be cut off. And he would have no idea what he did wrong. And I'll tell you what he did wrong. He would treat one of my daughters great because he liked her, and he would treat her sisters horribly. And let me tell you, that doesn't work. Because one of the fruits of the Spirit is kind. And we make this mistake in thinking, he's so kind to me. You know how easy it is to be kind to someone you like and you're crazy about? That's not how you figure out if someone's kind. How kind are they to other people? And that's what you have to notice and watch. I think probably a number of you have seen recently online the CEO who was caught on the camera with his flame. Now, I don't know if you saw the pictures of his wife. She's actually gorgeous. And all of us know actors who have this like babe of a wife, and then a year later he's cheating on her with some other girl. What does that tell you? It tells you it's not the outward, it's the inward. And you think about a wife who's older, because the Bible says beauty is what? Fleeting. And that applies to every one of us. I don't care how gorgeous you are, it's just a matter of time. So you have a wife who was gorgeous when she was super young. Now you're up in years and she's not what she used to be. How is she going to keep you happy? Well, you know what? If you're the right kind of guy, he's in love with your inner self. And the fact that you're not what you used to be doesn't matter at all. Isn't it the kind of person you want to marry? So let me leave you with this challenge. Just avoid the two extremes. The one extreme is, I never want to get married, and no matter what, I'm not budging. Now again, right now you have no desire. At least be open to the possibility that God could change your heart down the road. And be like Jesus, like he said, God, not your will be done, not my will be done, but yours be done. Have that kind of spirit in that area. And the second extreme is, I am obsessed with getting married. And there's some of you that are in that category, and a lot of us know who you are, because that's what you think about, and that's what you're focused on. And for you, your verse is going to be, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Amen.